Hello, and welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing You with Paula, the YouTube channel where we often dive deep into topics that impact our everyday lives. In this short video, you will meet Fern Chan. She is a best-selling author, educator, speaker, coach, and in our full interview on Apple Podcasts or wherever you tune into your podcast, Fern shares on how to captivate your audience, be an engaged presenter, speak with confidence, be memorable, and receive raving reviews. I invite you to subscribe to this channel so you can stay up to date and be notified of new video releases. Enjoy. Because you're an author, but before we go into that, I'd love you to just briefly introduce yourself to our audience. There will be some listeners and some viewers. Yeah, give us a little bit of intro to Fern Chan.
So Fern Chan now lives in New York, but I am an immigrant. I came to New York from New Zealand, so a long distance away, but a lot of interesting travels. I bring with me all these things that make me a part of who I am, being able to find my path, find my voice, and not be afraid to use those sort of platforms, right? To sort of say, well, how do I find myself in this world, but also assert myself and live in my own true self. So it's always been something that I was never afraid to speak my mind, which is a good thing, but maybe not so good depending on where you are in the world, but also like try to find ways to also share my genius with other people. So for me, being able to write this book was like, oh, like, why don't I share what I have, what I know to help other people be better presenters as well? So that came from that. And also, I'm a shameless ham. I love to get up on stage to perform. I've done, I was a musician in the past life, I was a dancer. So a lot of these things I feel like have prepared me to take on many stages, to prepare myself to speak to an audience, right? How do I engage an audience to get them to want to interact with me? But how do I share what I know in a way that also will entertain them for that brief moment so they can actually go, wow, that was great. I really enjoyed that. I remember Fern, she was, what she said was of such value, or I really enjoyed her performance, whatever it may be, right? Just for that brief moment, I managed to touch someone and it resonated with them.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're living on purpose and living your purpose.
It took a while to get there. It took a while to get there. I thought I was going to be, I was going to join the UN, save the world. That's what I wanted to do. That was like the reason I came to New York, right? From New Zealand. I graduated law school. It was like, 7 law firms and 200 of us. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to compete with all of you lot. So I'm going to like make my way to New York, because as the song goes, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And I really believe that.
And so those skills, because you went to law school, but then in our conversation when we first met a short while ago, you were talking about how you're now an educator, right? And so you've been working with, or you worked with law enforcement. And I found that very interesting.
Yeah. So, no, I worked in higher education for the last 15 plus years. So it's been training adult learners. So that's a very different market. I'm not talking about your undergraduates or your graduates. So people who've already got a career, but very specific in law enforcement. I was in a school of criminal justice. So we did a lot of training with law enforcement. And a lot of it came down to communication skills, especially crisis communication skills. So for me, as a trainer and educator, I'm in the classroom trying to train law enforcement officers to use communication skills first as a first line of defense before they have to reach for their weapon. So if I couldn't get that lesson to stick, then, lives could be at stake. So for me, I was thinking, how do I now make my presentations in a way that are so much more compelling, that relates to this audience, especially if I'm not a law enforcement officer. A lot of them will be like, well, who are you to tell me what to do when you're not a cop and you've never walked a day in my shoes? Yeah. So you now have to use other types of, communication skills, but also how can I relate to them that they will buy into what I have to say? And how can I also use this information to make sure that this is for their benefit? What's in it for them, right? So that's how I was able to like craft, certain types of messaging in a way. And then I also find that this works in any arena. But that was where I got a crux of my training too. And then I also I did a lot of presentations as part of my job, speaking at conferences. And I was very fortunate that I got to do a keynote at the United Nations in Vienna based on this very specific topic, right? How do we train law enforcement officers in a different kind of way so they can infuse the two things of like theory and practice, but also not kill them with boring death by PowerPoint if we're talking about, this is the law and this is how you apply it. But it's a very hard concept to break down when it's practicalities versus like legal jargon, right? How do you now know that you've met this burden of proof so that you don't get sued, but also keep lives, right? Keep people safe and all that sort of stuff. So it's
so now at the moment, are you a business coach? What exactly do you do now?
So I do offer coaching. I have a coaching program that helps people be dynamic presenters. So if you are a business professional and presenting is part of your job, let's say, and you have to do like quarterly reports, those can be quite boring. Who are your stakeholders that you have to report out to? Or like I said, even if for people who have to do professional development and they do get tapped to speak at conferences, right? How are you going to like report your findings in a way that makes sure that the message that you're giving resonates with the audience? And I also coach other trainers and entrepreneurs who have to figure out a way to speak about their products or service in a way that will solve that problem for their clientele or potential clients. Or to say, you know what? Do you know when you have this, what you can do about that? Let me tell you. So it's like, how can I help you to tell your story in a way that's compelling so people want to lean in and listen rather than you go on about, well, when I started the company, I think people forget, right? They go so much into their own story before they realize the story you actually need to tell is the transformation of what your audience will get when they use your service or product so they come out in a better place. I loved every moment of that life that I had. And now I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I can, use all the same skills to help other people who are not in law enforcement, but also face issues when they're talking with people like, well, how do I get my message to stick? How do I talk to people and make sure they're listening? How do I sell my service or product if I'm an entrepreneur? How do I make my students not fall asleep in class? It's one of those big things. Or if I'm a conference speaker, if I'm speaking at a conference, how do I make these people stay awake or lean in to ask questions so they want to know more and keep learning from me at the end? Because I would hate to put all that amazing knowledge, put all that effort, and then have everybody just fall asleep or look at their phones or just forget what you said the moment you stop talking, right? That to me is like such a travesty because you've just wasted all your time and you've wasted your audience's time, and nobody wants that. And I'll say this, like most people who volunteer to get up there to speak do it out of a place of love. They want to share their knowledge. They do believe that they have something of value to offer the world, but they just forget that to put on the other perspective, like how can the audience then benefit from this information rather than I've done 20 years of research and here it is brain dump in 40 minutes, my 20 years of research. And then you get slides that are like a gazillion bullet points, lines and lines of text, graphs and charts. And it's just so overwhelming. You're excited about the information, but your audience stopped listening way back, in slide number 2, because it was like, they've just gotten so paralyzed and then they've drifted off and they're like, when is this going to end? Versus like, well, how does this relate to me? Right? What can I do with this information? That's nice, but now so what? And I think how can you answer that question to say, well, so what? Let me tell you what happens if you don't use this information. So how can you use that information to hook your audience in to make it about them? Right? How is this going to be of benefit to them? How are you going to solve a problem for these people? Because people listen for one of two reasons. They have a problem. They want to know how to solve a problem. It's a lot of self-interest, right? If I'm coming to listen to you, why should I be listening to begin with? Right? You have something to say that I want to know about. So in that sense, you already have a captive audience. If you happen to be presenting, people show up in your slot to go, oh, well, I want to know about what she has to say. So, okay. So when you think about that, how do I then use that information to be of the greatest benefit to the listener?